Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar. Hope everybody is having a fantastic day so far. Before we begin, just a quick check. Could you tell me if you can hear me clearly? Just navigate to the panel on your right, click on the chat tab, and type yes if you can. Yes. All right, fantastic. As you know, our topic for today's webinar is supporting girls and young women with Asperger's Autism in mainstream educational settings. We are so pleased to have so many of you joining us today. I'm Anita Agatich from Speechmark, and we are truly honored to have with us Victoria Honeybourne, the distinguished author of Educating and Supporting Girls with Asperger's and Autism. She's also authored a resource on mental well-being for SEN called The Sky's the Limit. Victoria is a senior advisory teacher for speech, language, and communication needs with a particular interest in working with females on the autism spectrum. It's a true privilege having her here with us today. Now, before I hand over to Victoria, I'd just like to make a quick note. If you have any questions anytime during the webinar, feel free to type them into the questions tab that you can see on the panel on your right. Also, you can hide that panel when not required by clicking the orange arrow on top and maximize it again by clicking the same arrow. If you have any concerns, please type it in the chat box and we will try to resolve it as best we can. So, without any further ado, I'd like to ask Victoria to take it away, please.
Oh, thank you, Anita. Good afternoon, everybody. Just before I start, I do hope that everybody can hear me and see the PowerPoint that's up on the screens. I hope everyone can see that. I've really been looking forward to this webinar, but just to let you know, it is the first time I've done a webinar, so I'm a bit nervous as well. So I do apologise if I get anything wrong or miss bits out or anything like that. But I'll try and remember to do everything that I need to. So let's make a start. So the webinar this afternoon, it's called Supporting Girls and Young Women with Asperger's or Autism in Mainstream Educational Settings. So what we will cover, sorry, just one moment, let me go on to the next slide. Oh gosh. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so you should see that slide now. So what we'll cover today, we'll look first of all briefly just about why autism was predominantly a male diagnosis. We'll then look at the differences in how autism often presents in males and females, some of those differences. We'll look at difficulties that females on the autism spectrum may face in mainstream educational settings, and then look at how we can best support this group of students. So I just want to make a quick comment here about the terminology that we're using and the groups that we're talking about. So I am talking mainly about girls and young women who are educated in mainstream schools. So many of them have a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism. But these have recently been replaced. They all come under the term autism spectrum conditions. So just to let you know that if I use those different terms, I'm talking about the whole sort of autism spectrum. If I use the term Asperger's or autism, I might use them interchangeably just to cover all those groups of people. And also, as I've said, with my experience mainly in mainstream educational settings, so that's the sort of group that we will focus on. So let's just move on. Okay, and time for some introductions. So Anita has already introduced me. My name is Victoria. As you know, I've just written this book called Educating and Supporting Girls with Asperger's and Autism, and that's what I'm talking about today in this webinar, some of the ideas that are in that book. My interest in this has come about because I have a diagnosis of Asperger's myself. I was undiagnosed when I was at school. I had mixed experiences at school and university. I then became a teacher, and as an adult I was diagnosed with Asperger's. Professionally, I've worked as a teacher within a mainstream school. I've worked as a special needs teacher within language units and mainstream schools and autism bases, and I work as an advisory teacher for a local authority. But in that time, I've become particularly interested in this topic because of my own experiences. So I've become particularly interested working with girls and young women who are also on the autism spectrum. That's what led to my research, and then this book, which explains what life is like in school for girls who are on the autism spectrum and provides resources for that. So it's time for see who else we've got here. If we could have the first poll, if we could have that up now. You should be seeing something on your screens to see what roles people are in. That should be coming up at the moment. Sorry, I can't see that on mine yet. I'm not sure if people can see the poll that's come up on the screens. I'm sorry, we should see that in a moment. I'm not sure. I'm afraid I can't see that on mine. Okay, I've been told that that's come up. I'm sorry, I can't see that on my screen, so I'm sorry that I can't see that. But it seems like we've got quite a lot of speech and language therapists with us today. That's brilliant. Okay, I'm sorry that I can't see that on my screen. So let's make a start. Okay, let's make a start then. So let's just look briefly first at why autism has traditionally sort of been seen as a male diagnosis. So the original research into autism, as I'm sure many of you know, began in the 1940s. There's a Dr. Canner and Dr. Aspergers who sort of first recognised the condition. And in the original research, the majority of the participants were male. And really it went from there, the fact that autism was then seen as a traditionally male diagnosis. And the diagnostic criteria that came out of that was then built around that original research where the participants had mainly been male. We also have that sort of reflected in the media as well. If you think about it, often, you know, the autism that we see in the media is males as the main characters. If you think of the films like Rain Man, you know, the book The Curious Incident of Dog at Nighttime, The Rosie Project, even the recent television program The A Word, they're all mainly based on boys and men, and that's often the idea that people have about what autism is, that sort of that male presentation. And so there have been different numbers put forward, but one thing that we can be sure of is that a lot more boys and men have a diagnosis of autism than women. But there are various numbers. Some people say it's roughly 1 to 4, 1 to every 1 female has a diagnosis. It can be up to 4 males. There are other ratios that have been put forward as well. However, more recently, people are becoming aware that there actually may be just as many females on the autism spectrum as there are males, and that the the difference is that it presents quite differently in females. So, for example, some evidence that's been put forward suggests that females are more able to mask their difficulties or copy others to fit in, and maybe more socially skilled. So the autism looks a bit different in them than it does in men. And then also there can be different cultural and social expectations for girls and for boys, which can also lead to under or over identification of various conditions, including autism. So basically it has always been seen as more of a male diagnosis, but that is changing. So let's look now at some of the differences then. What might you see if you're supporting girls who are in, in school or college? What might you see that's different? So over the next couple of slides, I've brought together some of the main differences in how autism can present in girls and in boys. It is important to note, though, that the central characteristics of autism spectrum conditions are the same. It's just that perhaps girls react differently to their autism, and it presents a bit differently. So if you see the first thing that I've put up there, the idea that girls may be more able to mask their difficulties by copying others, mimicking what's going on, following others. So this could mean that they are harder to spot because on the surface they can be, seen to be doing what's expected because they're copying the social behaviour, perhaps mimicking others' expressions or language and things. But in fact, they'll have those same difficulties, but they're masking them a bit. There's also the theory that perhaps girls may be a bit more aware of how they should behave socially from a younger age. So maybe they're aware of things like, I should have friends or I should play with others. And therefore they may attempt to try and fit in and try and do those things. Or they might know the right things that they're meant to say when they're asked about those things. So again, it can mean that the autism is harder to spot. The third point that I've put on there is that some research shows that girls may actually try to join in with others, but they're actually sort of on the outside looking in, and so they might be physically present there in a group of peers, but they're not actually connecting on that same level. But again, because they are physically present in that group, it can hide the difficulties. The next point is that there's the suggestion that boys may be more noticeable because their difficulties and results in what we consider to be challenging behaviour, whereas girls might internalise those difficulties and they then become mental health difficulties. But again, it's something else why it might be easier to spot boys who are on the autism spectrum rather than girls. And there's also the idea, the possibility that girls' difficulties may actually become a bit more noticeable after puberty, when their friendships become a bit more complex. So the idea that some girls on the autism spectrum will have been able to cope up to a point when they're younger through, the copying and the mimicking and trying to fit in, but then when the friendships become more complex and there's that change of, a new emphasis on social and emotional connections and relationships, and more girls start talking about their feelings and emotions. So there's some evidence that that's when difficulties can become a bit more obvious then. So here on this slide, a few more differences. As you know, often special interest can be a feature of autism. And perhaps there's the idea that with boys, the interest might be a bit more unusual, they might stand out a bit. But in fact, for girls, some of their special interests might be similar things to their peers. They might, be interested in soap operas or celebrities or whatever it is, but it's actually the real intensity and the dominance of those interests that will sort of take over the whole of their life, and that's different. But again, it's a reason why girls might be harder to spot, because on the surface they have an interest which is perfectly sort of typical of girls that age, but it it would be, you know, much greater intensity and things. Tony Atwood suggests there that girls might develop coping strategies which hide their difficulties, or use their intellectual abilities rather than intuition to work out social situations. So they learn how to cope with different situations, or perhaps learn to avoid certain situations, or they might research a situation, so you know, have worked out from an intellectual level about what's expected and what their response should be and things like that. The next point there, the suggestion that some females on the autism spectrum can actually appear quite skilled in social situations, which again will hide their autism and can cause further difficulties, because on the surface of it that they're acting perfectly typically, so they might be treated with less tolerance than if they appeared to be a bit more autistic, so to speak. And then a few further differences that girls might be more willing to talk about their feelings and emotions than boys on the autism spectrum, and also that they might be a bit more expressive in their gestures and facial expressions and tone of voice. And again, those things might hide their autism a little bit. And then, as we know, one of the main difficulties for anyone on the autism spectrum can be friendships and relationships and connecting with others. But some girls on the autism spectrum may develop one quite intense friendship, perhaps becoming almost, you know, a bit of a fixation there. But again, because they have a friendship, because they have a friend, that also may hide difficulties with friendships because they appear to have a friend. So yeah, there are some of the main differences between how autism can present in boys and in girls. But the central sort of features of autism will be the same. It's just that girls may, you know, be coping with them differently. So it's time for another poll now. If I could ask Anita to put the poll up. I'm just asking, you know, what are the main different difficulties that you've noticed while you're working in your situations with girls on the autism spectrum? What are the main difficulties in the school situation? If you could just pick out your top one or two, let's see what people think the main difficulties are. Okay, so if you just take a moment to fill that in. And yeah, I don't think I can see that on my screen, so I will get the results sent through. Yeah, so yeah, a lot of people have said that the main difficulties are social ties and friendships and mental health needs. Okay, fab. That brings me nicely on to this next one. So I was going to talk about some of the main difficulties for girls on the autism spectrum in mainstream schools. And the biggest difficulty is, as people have said, social ties and friendships. That's why I put those near the top. That's what many of the girls say are, you know, difficulties for them at school. So social ties, for obvious reasons, as I'm sure you can all imagine, you know, that they are unstructured times. The emphasis is on socialising, particularly at secondary school. They're often just told to, you know, go out and socialise, go and be with your friends. Less adult support, you know, it's just less structured. And a lot of girls who I've spoken to said that those times were particularly difficult. They either you know, want to be by themselves, but that's not considered acceptable. You know, they perhaps need that time to recover after they've been around people all day in lessons, or the opposite, they wanted to join in, but they just couldn't make friends in the same way as others. And also a lot of girls said that social times were difficult because that's when they felt most isolated, most left out. Some were bullied at school, or, you know, it led to all sorts of problems there. Related to that was the idea, the issue of friendships. A lot of the girls and young women who I spoke to and interviewed and have worked with, friendships is obviously the big one. You know, difficulties making friends, keeping friends, or perhaps not wanting friends, being happy not having friends, but the emphasis is on friendships, particularly as you get older. And difficulties relating to friendship, shows of falling out with friends, and then the impact that has then on school and your attitude to school and how happy you are. Another difficulty that many mentioned is understanding the perspective of other people. So both you know, understanding and communicating with staff and with their peers. So difficulties including, you know, difficulties expressing themselves, feeling misunderstood, feeling like they you know, hadn't been understood correctly, or misinterpreting what other people meant, not being able to see their perspective. Those difficulties came up a lot. Group work is also something that was mentioned quite often, difficulties relating to group work. So some said they just found the very thought of group work caused them, you know, a tremendous amount of anxiety. So for some it was being able to communicate with a group. Others found the you know, the dynamics of group conversation just too overwhelming, too much going on, found that they couldn't contribute to that, couldn't communicate. Others felt that you know, other pupils didn't want to work with them because they were considered to be a bit odd or a bit different, or they didn't understand the you know, the social aspect of group work. They just wanted to get on with the work, whereas others had that sort of social aspect. And some of the girls with Asperger's and with autism said that they just wanted to get on with it and didn't like it if, you know, the rest of the group were messing around or not following the rules, and things like that caused them a lot of anxiety. Then there's the idea of some difficulties with learning. Like I said, most of my experience has been in mainstream settings, and for a lot of the girls, they actually said that they didn't have major difficulties with learning. A lot of them, they said they actually, you know, some quite liked learning, some said they had good memories, you know, they were quite interested in the subject, but they said the difficulties were with sort of related things. So the planning and the organisation they found difficult, or actually being able to show their knowledge was a difficulty for some, or interpreting the question and understanding, you know, what the examiner wants to know, you know, what the teacher wanted, or, you know, getting homework done and issues like that. Then obviously other difficulties can be sensory issues, as with anyone on the autism spectrum. There can be difficulties in school, you know, the noise, the background noise, crowds, people, lighting, smells, different things like that. And lots said a major difficulty for them was just a constant anxiety, feeling anxious all the time during the school day, and managing their emotions. A lot said they felt very frustrated, particularly over things like when rules weren't clear, or when sanctions weren't applied consistently, or when the instructions weren't clear, and that, you know, they've been following instructions but then were told we're doing something wrong. So all of those frustrations and anxieties, things like that, and also self-esteem. A lot of females on the autism spectrum reported just having very low self-esteem when they're at school because of everything. So they were by no means the only difficulties in schools and colleges for girls on the autism spectrum, but there were some of the ones that were mentioned most frequently. And there's lots more detail about those and what schools can do around those in my book. So here I've just put some quotes on that some of the girls and women I interviewed gave, just to give you a bit of a further insight into some of these difficulties. Some have already mentioned that one there near the top about group work. A lot mentioned that how group work was you know, a cause of great anxiety for them. There's also the other one at the top, in the top right, where the person said, a lot of the time that for some there was actual bullying going on, but others said that they felt bullied even if they weren't necessarily being bullied. But the idea that they felt that they were constantly being made to do something that they just didn't want to do, and it was often well meant by peers or adults, but if there was a girl who say for example was quite happy, sitting by herself reading a book at break time, at playtime, and then the others are constantly saying, oh, come and join in, come and play with us, come and do this, come and do that. To that girl, after a while, it can come across that she is being bullied and trying to be made to do something that she really just doesn't want to do. So there's that sort of perception of things. Team games were horrendous. Again, a few mentioned that, just all those issues around team games. One student said, she didn't like teachers who were always shouting or had loud voices, and that was echoed by a few others as well. Because of those sensory issues, someone who is shouting, or perhaps not necessarily shouting, just speaking in a loud teacher voice, it can feel very uncomfortable. But for some girls with sensory issues, it can also, they can interpret that as, oh, that teacher must be angry, she must be angry at me, I must have done something wrong, and get into all that cycle of thoughts. There's a quote there about differences in communication styles. So the girl who got told off for not listening, but just the fact that she found eye contact very uncomfortable. So again, there are quite a lot of issues around things like that. And there at the bottom of that slide, you can say, someone said, oh, for me, school was for learning. Rewards for other pupils felt like punishments to me. And that idea that, often when we're in schools, as rewards that we give pupils, things like, well, you can work with your friends for the next task, or you can have extra golden time, extra play time, you can have no homework tonight, those sorts of rewards. But actually, for some girls on the autism spectrum, they almost saw them as punishments, being given extra play time and the opportunity to work with friends who they didn't have and things. So that perception that what might be rewards for other people were actually almost felt like punishments for them. Right, so there were some of the difficulties that girls on the autism spectrum can face in schools. Like I said, that's no means comprehensive. They're just a few of the examples I picked out from the book. So just moving on now to looking at how we can support these girls and young women on the autism spectrum who are in sort of schools and things. So in my book, I sort of suggest this model of 4 things that may be useful when you're thinking about this, to ensure those sort of successful outcomes, in terms of how to increase self-esteem and a sense of well-being, and the ability to cope with everyday issues and participate and things like that. So the first thing, some things can be directly taught and learnt. So some girls on the autism spectrum might benefit from the explicit teaching of things like conversational skills or social skills or assertiveness skills, or planning and organisational skills, things like that. Some things can be directly taught. They might just need that taught a bit more directly and explicitly than their peers. Another one, some students might benefit from being taught coping strategies. And again, it will be very individual from student to student what they need, but they might learn coping strategies, how they can cope with their particular sensory sensitivities or things like that. The other thing that we could do is adapt the environment. So it might be things like providing quiet areas, or removing background noise, things like that. But also making the learning environment a bit more autism friendly, making rules and instructions very clear and consistent, and adapting the adults working in that environment, their communication style as well. thinking about we mentioned tone of voice and things like that. And then the last one, and probably the most important there, probably needs a lot of the idea of acceptance, really, and from both sides. So encouraging the girls on the autism spectrum to accept themselves for who they are and get that sense of self-acceptance, but also that needs to come from people around them as well. Really important that they accept the girl on the autism spectrum for being who they are and don't constantly try and make them be something that they're not. So there's lots of ideas for all of those different areas in my book, lots of activities and resources and templates and things. I know that I'm coming towards the end now, so I can't go into any in detail, but I have thought of, if you're just looking for what 3 things can you do, main 3 things, put some ideas together here. So the first one, the idea of reducing anxiety, anything that you can do to help reduce anxiety for students on the autism spectrum is a good thing, because how can any sort of real learning take place, or how can you learn to accept your autism and cope with that if you're constantly in a state of anxiety. So anything that you can do to reduce anxiety that's arisen because of sensory issues or upcoming events or things in class or anything like that can really help. But one of the girls I interviewed gave me a lovely quote. She said, "Help me to be happy to be me and don't try to make me be something that I'm not." And I just thought that sums it up really. And a lot of the girls and young women on the autism spectrum said that they just wanted people to accept them for being who they were. They just wanted that sort of validation to help them feel comfortable and make their preferences just as normal as anybody else's. Anything that you can do to help make it normal to be different, can be really helpful. So, for example, if you've got a quiet area for social times at break and lunch times, just make that a normal choice for anyone in the class. For anyone who wants to go and use a quiet area, don't just make it something that the one girl on the autism spectrum can do. Just make it a normal choice that anyone can do. And a lot of the girls said that things like that would have really helped. They didn't want to appear to be seen any more different than they already felt, really. So anything that you can do to make different preferences seem normal is great. And the last one, about supporting social times. It's obviously a big area of difficulty for a lot of girls who are in mainstream schools. So anything that you could do to make those times a bit more pleasant and enjoyable is likely to help. So that might be things like providing structured activities, so the things like the film club or the art club or computer club, homework club, whatever it is. Some girls also said they liked having jobs to do or a task to do. So if you mentioned that they liked being given responsibility to be a librarian at lunchtime and keep the books tidy and things like that, gave them something to do. And for others, they said they just needed a quiet area during those breaks and lunch times. They just wanted to completely be by themselves. They've been around people all day. They just needed to really sort of time to recover from that and be by themselves during those social times. But like I said, there's lots of other things, lots of other ideas in the book and things. So I'm almost coming to the end of the time that I've been given for that webinar. I know it's been a very quick tour of why there are differences between some girls and boys on the autism spectrum, but I hope it's given you an insight into some of those differences and some of the difficulties that girls may face when they're in mainstream schools and colleges, and an idea of where you might begin when you're supporting them. Yeah, just a reminder, the book is available from SpeechMark. I've also written a book about teaching mental well-being to to students with special educational needs, which is available. And there is a discount code which should be coming up there on your screens for participants who have come to this webinar. You can use that discount code to get 20% discount from the resources. So I just want to say a big thank you for all sticking with me and for listening. I do hope you found that a useful introduction to supporting girls on the autism